Picture this: a young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, then Memphis, Tennessee, steps into a tiny recording studio. It's 1954, he sings a song. The world changes. That's what people say about Elvis Presley. But how did it happen? What was he actually singing? It wasn't just one kind of music. It was a mashup. A wild, beautiful mix. Blues, country, gospel, all rolled into one voice, one body. Think about it. Black music, white music, sacred music, secular music. All these lines that people drew, Elvis just blurred them. He didn't mean to, probably. He just sang what he felt. For a long time, people argued about what Elvis was. Was he country? Was he rhythm and blues? Was he just a kid who got lucky? Music critics, historians, even his own band members, they've all had ideas. But the core of it, the thing that made him different was this blend. This fusion. It came from where he grew up, what he heard on the radio, what he sang in church. His sound wasn't invented in a lab. It grew up naturally in the American South. The kind of place where different sounds bounced off each other all the time. White gospel quartets, black blues singers, country fiddlers. It was all there. And Elvis, he soaked it all up like a sponge. But how did he manage to bring these distinct musical traditions together so seamlessly? And why him? Why did his voice, his style, become the flashpoint for rock and roll when others were doing similar things? What made him the king? These are big questions, and people have spent years trying to figure them out. They've written books, conducted research, interviewed everyone they could find. They've looked at his records, his performances, his life story, and what they found tells us a lot about music, culture, and America itself. It tells us sometimes the most powerful things happen when different worlds collide. Number 15, where did all that sound come from? Elvis Presley's music didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came from a specific place at a specific time and from a specific person's experiences. Think of it like a river, fed by many streams. For Elvis, these streams were the blues, country, and gospel music he heard growing up. He was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935. This was the Deep South. Music was everywhere. It wasn't just entertainment, it was part of daily life. His family was poor. They lived in a shotgun shack. His father, Vernon, worked odd jobs. His mother, Gladys, was his rock. They went to the Assembly of God church. This was crucial. In this church, music was vibrant. It was alive. It wasn't quiet hymns. It was loud, emotional singing. People clapped their hands, stomped their feet. They felt the spirit. This was Elvis's first real musical training. He heard gospel music with a raw, powerful energy. This sound, often featuring male quartets, was deeply ingrained in his memory and vocal style. Scholars like Robert Gordon, in his book The King on the Road, often highlight the deep roots of gospel in Elvis's childhood. He wasn't just hearing it, he was participating. But outside the church, there was other music. Tupelo was segregated, but sounds don't always obey those lines. Black neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, the radio signals didn't care. And Elvis heard country music, often called hillbilly music back then. He listened to the Grand Ole Opry on WSM radio from Nashville. Stars like Ernest Tubb and Jimmy Rogers were big. He loved country music's storytelling, its raw emotion, its simple melodies. He absorbed the twang, the guitar styles. Some researchers looking at early radio programming guides from the 1940s have noted how omnipresent country music was in the rural South, even for kids like Elvis who had little money for records. And then there was the blues. This was the music of the black community. It was played in juke joints, on street corners, and on local radio stations. Bluesmen like Arthur Crudup, B.B. King, and Howlin' Wolf were creating powerful, emotive music. Elvis, a white kid, was exposed to this. He'd sneak down to Beale Street in Memphis once his family moved there in 1948. He'd listen, he'd watch, he heard the heartache, the grit, the swagger of the blues. Musicologists, when they analyze early Elvis recordings, often point to specific vocal inflections or guitar licks that directly echo blues artists he admired. Peter Grolnick's Last Train to Memphis paints a vivid picture of young Elvis absorbing these sounds from his surroundings. It wasn't just passive listening, it was active learning. He was internalizing these varied musical forms without even trying. He wasn't thinking about genres, he was thinking about sounds he liked. His first guitar was a birthday gift when he was 10 or 11. He learned to play by listening, by trying things out. He didn't read music. He just felt it. This informal education was key. It meant he wasn't constrained by rules. He was free to mix and match. He could take a blues riff, sing it with a gospel fervor, and give it a country lyrical twist. It all seemed natural to him because that's how he experienced music in his life. It was all just music. And this personal, unmediated relationship with sound laid the foundation for everything that came next. He was a sponge, soaking up every sound wave that hit him. What if Elvis had grown up somewhere else? What if his church hadn't been so lively? What if he never moved to Memphis? Would he have found his voice? How much of his fusion was conscious and how much was just instinct? Did he know he was doing something new, or was he just being himself? Number 14 was Sam Phillips, really searching for a white man with a black sound. The story of Elvis and Sam Phillips is famous. Sam Phillips owned Sun Records in Memphis. He famously said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." This quote, repeated countless times, often frames the entire narrative of Elvis's discovery. But was it really that simple? And was Elvis just a vessel for Phillips's ambition? And Phillips was a pioneer. He recorded blues artists like Howlin' Wolf, Junior Parker, and B.B. King. He also recorded country singers. He heard something powerful in the raw, authentic music of the South, especially black rhythm and blues. He knew it had energy, and he believed it had commercial potential beyond its niche markets. He saw the racial and economic barriers that kept these sounds from a wider, mostly white audience. This wasn't just about money for Phillips, it was about bringing great music to more people. He had a genuine love for the music itself. Historians like Colin Escott, in his definitive work Good Rockin' Tonight, Sun Records, and the Birth of Rock and Roll, emphasize Phillips's deep respect for his artists and their music even as he was driven by business. So when Elvis first walked into Sun Records in July 1953, he wasn't looking to become a star. He wanted to record a custom demo for his mother Gladys as a birthday present. He sang My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin, two ballads. Marion Keisker, Phillips's assistant, noted his name and wrote a comment, "Good ballad singer, hold." She also noted something else. "He sounds like he could do a good job on a blues song." This little note is telling. It suggests that even in his initial, somewhat hesitant performance, there was an underlying quality, a resonance that hinted at the blues. But Phillips didn't immediately call him back. It took nearly a year. In the summer of 1954, Phillips was looking for someone to sing Without You, a ballad. He remembered Elvis. Elvis tried it, but it didn't quite work. Phillips then asked him about other songs. Elvis started singing anything and everything he knew. He sang country, he sang pop, and he probably sang some gospel. He also sang blues, and that's when things changed. During a break on July 5th, 1954, Elvis, Scotty Moore, guitar, and Bill Black bass were messing around. Elvis started singing That's All Right Mama. This was a blues song originally by Arthur Crudup. But Elvis didn't sing it like Crudup. He sang it with a faster tempo, a lighter feel, a country swing. He was making it his own. Scotty Moore and Bill Black, seasoned musicians themselves, picked up on it. They started playing along. Phillips heard it from the control room. He rushed out. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Playing around," Elvis said. Phillips told them to do it again. And that was the moment. This wasn't a calculated eureka, discovery of the white man with the black sound in the way the famous quote suggests. It was an accident, it was spontaneous, it was Elvis naturally blending the sounds he loved without thinking about genre boundaries. Phillips, with his keen ear, recognized the magic in that blend. He saw the commercial potential, yes, but he also saw the authenticity. He wasn't looking for a copy of a black singer, he was looking for originality that drew from black musical forms. And Elvis delivered it. He didn't imitate, he interpreted. This first recording, That's All Right, backed with Blue Moon of Kentucky, a country song by Bill Monroe, also sped up and given a bluesy kick, immediately showcased the fusion. It was a blues song done with country instruments and a rock and roll energy. It was country music done with a bluesy swagger. This blending was key. It broke rules. It confused people. And it launched a revolution. Did Phillips's quote oversimplify the complex process of Elvis's development? Was Phillips more of a shrewd businessman than a true visionary? How much of the Negro sound was truly distinct from the white sound and the hybrid culture of the South? And how much did Elvis's lack of formal training actually enable his groundbreaking fusion? Number 13, how deep did the blues go in Elvis's soul? The blues wasn't just a style Elvis borrowed, it was a fundamental part of his musical DNA. From his early days in Memphis, soaking up the sounds on Beale Street, to his final performances, the blues shaped his vocal delivery, his choice of material, and his very stage presence. It was gritty, raw, and full of emotion that resonated with him. Think about the feeling of the blues. It's about struggle, heartache, longing, and sometimes a defiant joy. Elvis knew struggle. His family was poor. He moved around. He was an outsider in school sometimes. This personal connection, whether conscious or not, allowed him to sing blues with genuine conviction. Musicologists such as David Evans, who specializes in Mississippi Delta blues, often connect the emotional depth of artists to their lived experiences, and Elvis was no exception, despite his eventual fame. When Elvis sang That's All Right, his debut single, he chose a song by Arthur Big Boy Crudup, a black blues musician. But he didn't just cover it, he reinterpreted it. Crudup's version was slow, mournful, heavy. Elvis's was light, fast, almost playful. Yet the core blues feeling, the call and response between his voice and Scotty Moore's guitar, the walking bass line from Bill Black, it was all there. It wasn't a pale imitation, it was a transformation. This transformation made the blues accessible to a new, broader audience, many of whom had never heard Crudup. Many of his early Sun Records songs like Baby Let's Play House, Arthur Gunter, but infused with blues feel, Mystery Train, Junior Parker, and Good Rockin' Tonight Roy Brown, but closer to Wynonie Harris's R&B version, were either straight blues numbers or rhythm and blues tracks infused with a blues sensibility. He borrowed the vocal inflections, the bending of notes, the raw power. He picked up the rhythmic drive, the emphasis on the beat that was characteristic of rhythm and blues. Later, even after he left Sun Records for RCA, the blues stayed with him. Consider his cover of Hound Dog. Big Mama Thornton's original from 1952 was a powerful, defiant blues anthem. Elvis's 1956 version was faster, more aggressive, and became one of his signature hits. But the underlying blues structure, the lyrical sass, the raw vocal delivery, that was all rooted in the blues tradition. He wasn't just singing words, he was embodying the feeling. Music critics often debated if his version stripped the blues essence or popularized it. Works by Greil Marcus, especially Mystery Train Images of America and rock and roll music, delve into how Elvis engaged with and transformed these foundational American genres. And it wasn't just the songs he chose, it was how he sang. His vocal range, his ability to go from a smooth croon to a guttural growl, his use of falsetto, his rhythmic phrasing all showed the deep influence of blues and gospel singers. When he would moan or sigh into the microphone, those were echoes of blues shouts and gospel wails. When he held a note, bending it just so you could hear the influence of B.B. King. You know, when he moved his hips on stage, that was the physical embodiment of the rhythm he had absorbed. It was earthy, visceral. Even during his film career and later in the Vegas years, the blues still surfaced. Songs like Reconciled Baby, recorded in 1960, or Big Boss Man 1967 show his continued engagement with the genre. His 1968 comeback special, often seen as a return to his roots, was heavily steeped in blues and R&B, from his leather-clad performances to the informal jam sessions. He wasn't just recreating his past, he was showing that the blues was still alive inside him. It wasn't just an influence, it was a part of who he was as an artist. Did Elvis truly understand the suffering and context of the blues as black artists did? Or was his interpretation a form of cultural appropriation, however unintentional? How much of the blues' raw power was smoothed out or popularized for white audiences by Elvis? And could he have achieved his level of stardom without this deep connection to the blues? Number 12, how did Grand Ole Opry's sounds mix with his Memphis heat? Country music was everywhere in Elvis's early life, just like the blues and gospel. It was the mainstream music of white working class families in the South. His parents loved it. He grew up hearing it on the radio, at home, but Elvis didn't just sing country songs. He electrified them, he gave them a jolt of rhythm and blues energy, making them something entirely new. The Opry, broadcasting from Nashville, was a big deal. For families like the Presleys, it was the voice of home, tradition, and entertainment. Artists like Hank Williams, Lefty Frizzell, and Eddie Arnold were household names. Elvis knew their songs, he admired their storytelling, their emotional honesty. The music historian Bill C. Malone's Country Music, USA, details the pervasive influence of the Opry and country radio in the mid-20th century South, shaping the musical tastes of millions, including future stars like Elvis. When Elvis went into Sun Records, he brought country music with him. His second single, the B-side to That's All Right, was Blue Moon of Kentucky. This was a classic bluegrass waltz by Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys. Monroe's version was slow, mournful, very traditional country. Elvis and his band turned it into something entirely different. They sped it up. They gave it a driving rhythm, they made it swing. Bill Black slapped his bass. Scotty Moore played a rockabilly-style guitar solo that was country, but faster, edgier. Elvis sang it with a hiccuping vocal style that blended country affectation with bluesy grit. It wasn't country anymore, not strictly, but it wasn't pure blues either. It was a new hybrid. This was a genius move by Sam Phillips. To put a blues-rooted song on one side and a country-rooted song on the other, both transformed, immediately showed the breadth of what Elvis was doing. It demonstrated his ability to cross these supposed genre lines with ease. It wasn't just a gimmick. It was genuine. Elvis loved both types of music. He truly did. And he didn't see a reason to keep them separate. Many of his early Sun recordings and later RCA tracks carried a distinct country flavor. Songs like I Forgot to Remember to Forget, his first #1 on the national country charts in 1955, Mystery Train though R&B, its themes resonated with country audiences, You're a Heartbreaker, and Loving You all show this influence. He sang about broken hearts, lost love, and simple pleasures, themes central to country music. But he sang them with a rhythm and a swagger that country hadn't quite seen before. The instrumentation, too, often had a country feel. Scotty Moore's guitar playing, though influenced by blues, also drew heavily from country pickers like Chet Atkins and Merle Travis. His clean, precise, yet driving style was a bridge between genres. Bill Black's upright bass, providing a strong rhythmic foundation, was standard in country and bluegrass bands. Even the vocal harmonies Elvis sometimes employed, especially in his later gospel-influenced country recordings, echoed the close harmony singing of country and bluegrass groups. This fusion wasn't always welcomed by traditional country fans or institutions. The Grand Ole Opry, for example, wasn't impressed by his early performances. After one appearance in 1954, legend has it that Opry manager Jim Denny told Elvis he should go back to driving a truck. This story, documented by several biographers, including Guralnick, highlights the resistance to his new sound. It was too wild, too bluesy, too sexual for the staid Opry stage, but the young audiences loved it. They heard the familiar country melodies and themes, but with an exciting, rebellious energy. How much of country music's appeal for Elvis was about nostalgia, and how much was about pure musical taste? Did the country establishment ever truly accept Elvis's version of their music? In what ways did his music both preserve and dismantle traditional country values? And what would country music sound like today if Elvis had never fused it with the blues? Number 11 was his gospel music. Just a Sunday thing, or was it the heart of his sound? Gospel music was not just a side note in Elvis Presley's life, it was foundational. It was in his bones, his spirit, his very voice. He grew up in the Assembly of God Church, a Pentecostal denomination where music was central, vibrant, and incredibly emotional. This wasn't passive listening, it was active participation. He sang in church, he absorbed the powerful singing of white gospel quartets, and he felt the spiritual fervor. This exposure deeply informed his vocal style, his stage presence, and his enduring connection to music's spiritual side. The Assembly of God Church embraced an expressive, uninhibited style of worship. The music was lively, often featuring call and response patterns, hand clapping, and spontaneous vocalizations that blurred the lines between singing and shouting. Scholars like Michael T. Bertrand in Race, Rock, and Elvis have explored how Pentecostal traditions provided a powerful, expressive, and even ecstatic framework for Elvis's artistic development. This environment taught him how to pour every ounce of emotion into a song. It taught him the power of a sustained note, a dramatic pause, a sudden burst of vocal intensity. Elvis loved gospel quartets. Groups like the Blackwood Brothers and the Statesman Quartet were his idols. He would go to all-night gospel sings whenever he could. He knew their songs by heart. He learned harmony singing from listening to them. His voice, with its deep baritone range and its soaring tenor capabilities, was perfectly suited for gospel. And you can hear it in everything he sang, even his most secular rock and roll songs. The melisma, that technique of singing multiple notes on a single syllable notes, a hallmark of both gospel and blues, was a natural part of his singing. Consider his vocal acrobatics. the way he would slide between notes, the way he would suddenly jump to a high register, the powerful sustain of his voice. These are all techniques honed in the gospel tradition. Even his stage movements, often described as sexual or rebellious, had roots in the uninhibited expression of Pentecostal worship. The shaking, the emotional intensity, the physical manifestation of feeling the music, it wasn't just for show. It came from a deep internal place cultivated in the church. Elvis recorded many gospel albums throughout his career. He won 3 Grammy Awards, all for gospel recordings, How Great Thou Art 1967, He Touched Me 1972, and for his live performance of How Great Thou Art 1974. This wasn't just a polite nod to his roots, this was a core part of his artistry. He genuinely loved singing gospel. He found solace in it. Even during the peak of his rock and roll fame, he would often gather with his band or friends and just sing gospel songs informally, sometimes for hours. These impromptu sessions, often recounted by his sidemen like Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, showed the authentic joy and spiritual connection he had to this music. The gospel influence wasn't just about the specific songs, it was about the spiritual depth he brought to all his music. Even in a bluesy love song or a country ballad, there was an underlying sense of conviction, a quest for meaning, an emotional rawness that connected back to his gospel training. It allowed him to transform secular songs into something almost sacred, imbuing them with a powerful, almost religious intensity. It was the heart of his sound, the soul of his performance. If Elvis had joined a different denomination, would his music have been so free and expressive? Did his secular success ever make his gospel singing feel less authentic to some? How did he reconcile the sacred passion of gospel with the often criticized sinful nature of his rock and roll? And could his impact have been as profound if he hadn't had such a strong foundation in gospel? Number 10, how did the blues, country, and gospel actually dance together in his early songs? The true magic of Elvis's early music wasn't just that he knew blues, country, and gospel. It was how he made them intertwine, sometimes within a single song. It wasn't always a neat, separate layering. Often, these elements blended, creating something entirely new, a sound that confused and thrilled people all at once. This fusion, right from his Sun Records days, was messy, instinctive, and utterly brilliant. Take That's All Right Mama. It's a blues song, but his vocal delivery isn't pure blues. There's a country lilt, a youthful exuberance that wasn't typical of the original Arthur Crudup version. Scotty Moore's guitar solo, while showing blues roots, also has a clean, almost country western swing feel to it. And Bill Black's bass line is driving, like a rhythm and blues track, but it's also got that walking, rhythmic quality you'd find in country boogie. And the overall feeling, the raw, uninhibited energy, carries a hint of gospel fervor, as if he's preaching a new kind of sermon. It's not one genre, it's a conversation between all three. Music theorists often struggle to categorize rockabilly precisely because it's such a fluid blend, as articulated in books like Robert Gordon's It Came From Memphis. And then there's Blue Moon of Kentucky, originally a country waltz. Elvis turned it into a rockabilly romp. The country roots are clear in the melody and the lyrics about loneliness, but he speeds it up, gives it a rhythm that borders on rhythm and blues. His vocal hiccups and expressive cries have a country and blues mixed flavor, almost like a yodel but grittier. And the sheer joy in his voice, that unrestrained enthusiasm, again, pulls from the expressive freedom found in gospel singing. It demonstrates that the blend wasn't an academic exercise. It was just how he heard music in his head. Listen to Mystery Train. This was a rhythm and blues song by Junior Parker. Elvis's version is lean, driving, almost minimalist. The train metaphor is common in both blues and country music, symbolizing escape, movement, change. His vocal performance here is pure blues emotion, but the sparse instrumentation, the starkness of the sound, also resonates with the simplicity and directness of early country recordings. You know, the way he emphasizes certain words, like almost stretching them out, speaks to both blues and gospel traditions of emotional vocalization. Historians and music critics like Peter Guralnick in his detailed biographies show how this was not a conscious, calculated strategy. It was a natural outgrowth of Elvis's influences and his intuitive approach to music. He wasn't thinking, I need 30% blues, 40% country, 30% gospel here. He was simply singing what felt right. He was channeling all the sounds he loved and making them his own. His bandmates, Scotty Moore and Bill Black, also played a crucial role. They were experienced musicians from diverse backgrounds themselves. Moore came from a country background, but was adept at blues. Black was primarily a rhythm and blues player, but could adapt to anything. Together, they were the perfect vehicle for Elvis's genre-bending vision. This informal, spontaneous blending was what made Elvis's early music so revolutionary. It shattered existing musical categories. It showed that music didn't have to stay in its assigned lanes. It could flow freely, mix and mingle, and create something exciting and new. It was a cultural earthquake because it reflected a society that was also slowly starting to blur its own rigid lines, even if reluctantly. This sound didn't just entertain, it challenged. Was this instinctive fusion something unique to Elvis? Or were other musicians also doing similar things but without his impact? Could his success be attributed more to the right timing and the right collaborators than to his pure musical genius? How much of this early fusion was truly innovative, and how much was a reflection of the already hybridized culture of the American South? Did the simplicity of Sun Records recording techniques enhance or limit this fusion? Number 9, what happened when the fusion hit the big time with RCA? When Elvis left Sun Records for RCA Victor in November 1955, everything changed. The small independent label that nurtured his raw sound gave way to a massive national record company. RCA paid a huge sum for his contract, $35,000, an unprecedented amount for an unknown rock and roll artist at the time, with $5,000 going to Elvis. This move amplified his reach, but it also raised questions about whether his unique fusion could survive the pressures of commercialization. While RCA was a major player, they had distribution networks, marketing muscle, and access to top songwriters. They aimed to make Elvis a national, even international star, and they succeeded. His first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, released in January 1956, became his first #1 hit. It was a huge success, but how did it sound? Heartbreak Hotel itself is a prime example of the ongoing fusion. It's got a mournful, bluesy melody and a somber, almost gothic atmosphere. His vocal delivery is steeped in blues heartache. But the instrumentation also has a country feel, especially the twangy guitar. And the underlying emotional intensity, the sense of lament, has a definite gospel resonance like a secular spiritual. It was a different sound than his Sun material, a bit more polished, a bit darker, but still very much a blend. Musicologists like Ernest Jorgensen and his comprehensive Elvis Presley, A Life in Music, often trace the evolution of Elvis's sound through his RCA recordings, highlighting both continuity and change. RCA brought in more musicians like pianist Floyd Kramer and drummer DJ Fontana, who was often with him at Sun but became a full-time fixture. This expanded sound allowed for more sophisticated arrangements, but the core trio of Elvis, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black still provided the backbone, ensuring that the raw, blended energy remained. The biggest impact of RCA was reach. Suddenly, Elvis was on national TV shows like Stage Show, The Milton Berle Show, The Steve Allen Show, and The Ed Sullivan Show. Millions of people who might never have heard a Sun record now saw and heard him. His fusion of blues, country, and gospel, delivered with his electrifying stage presence, became mainstream. He was no longer a regional phenomenon. This widespread exposure also led to backlash. His suggestive hip movements and raw sound were seen as dangerous by many parents and moral guardians. Critics often labeled his music as Negro music and dismissed it. But for teenagers, it was liberating. They heard a sound that spoke to them, a mix of sounds they already liked, but supercharged. RCA also encouraged him to record a wider variety of material. He recorded more straight-ahead pop ballads, country tunes, and gospel tracks. This diversified his appeal. But even in these more genre-specific recordings, you could hear the influence of the other traditions. His gospel songs had a bluesy edge, his country songs had a rock and roll drive, and his pop ballads had a soulful depth. He couldn't shake his roots and he didn't want to. The massive sales numbers tell the story. In 1956 alone, he had 5 #1 singles, he sold millions of records. His RCA period cemented him as the king of rock and roll. The fusion, refined and amplified, became the sound of a generation. It showed that music could transcend racial and cultural boundaries, even if society was still struggling with them. It was a national phenomenon born from a regional blend. Did RCA's commercial ambitions dilute the rawness of his early fusion, or did it simply bring it to a wider audience? Could Elvis have become as big without the marketing might of RCA? How much creative control did Elvis lose in the transition from Sun to RCA, and how did it affect the purity of his genre bending? And what if he had stayed at Sun Records, he would rock and roll have developed differently? Number 8. Why did so many people get mad about his music? Elvis's rise was met with incredible excitement, but also intense anger and moral panic. His music, and especially his stage presence, caused a huge stir. This wasn't just about the music itself, but what it represented, a challenging of social norms, especially racial and sexual boundaries. His fusion of blues, country, and gospel was at the heart of this controversy. Think about the context of the 1950s. America was still largely segregated, especially in the South. Different genres had their own charts, radio stations, and audiences. White artists mostly played white music, and black artists played black music. Blues and rhythm and blues were considered race music, primarily for black audiences. Pure country music was hillbilly music, primarily for white, rural audiences. Gospel was sacred, but also segregated. Elvis came along and blended these sounds in a way that had never been accepted on a mass scale by white audiences. When Elvis sang a blues song or a rhythm and blues song with a strong beat and an impassioned vocal, it sounded black to many white listeners. And when a white man performed black music with such raw, uninhibited emotion and physical energy, it was seen as shocking, even dangerous. Many white parents feared their children, especially teenage girls, were being exposed to something primitive or immoral. Scholars like Michael T. Bertrand, in works discussing the intersection of race and popular culture, extensively cover the racial anxieties stirred by Elvis's music. His performances were often described as vulgar or animalistic in newspaper editorials of the time. The sexual element was undeniable. Elvis moved his hips. He gyrated. He made girls scream. This physical expression of the music was rooted in the raw energy of rhythm and blues performers and the ecstatic worship of Pentecostal churches. But in the conservative 1950s, it was seen as overtly sexual and a threat to public morality. Ministers preached against him. Parent-teacher associations organized boycotts. Some cities banned his performances or tried to censor his movements on television. Famously, on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, he was filmed only from the waist up to prevent showing his offensive movements. But the controversy also had a deep racial undertone. Critics often explicitly referred to his music as unword music or jungle music. The idea that a white artist was performing music historically associated with black Americans and doing it with such success challenged the established racial hierarchy. It was a cultural transgression. For some, it felt like an invasion. For others, it felt like an exciting breakdown of barriers. The music was blurring lines that society insisted remain firm. His appropriation, even if unwitting, of black musical styles also drew criticism. While many black artists and audiences recognized his talent and respect for the music, some saw it as another instance of white artists profiting from black creativity without giving proper credit or share. Artists like Big Mama Thornton, who first recorded Hound Dog, saw Elvis's version become a massive hit, while her original remained less known to mainstream audiences. This complex issue of appropriation versus appreciation is a recurring theme in music scholarship, notably discussed in works by authors like Houston and Baker Jr. when looking at blues aesthetics. The uproar, paradoxically, made him even more famous. The controversy fueled his legend. The more he was criticized, the more teenagers rallied to his side. They saw an artist who dared to be different, who wasn't afraid to shake things up. The fact that he merged sounds that were traditionally kept separate was a huge part of his appeal to them. He was breaking down barriers, even if unwittingly, and in the process, creating a new kind of freedom for young people. Did the moral panic around Elvis ultimately help or hinder the acceptance of his music's fusion? Was the criticism primarily about race and sex, or also about a fear of change and youth rebellion in general? Could Elvis have achieved his stardom if he had been a black artist performing the same fusion? And how much of the shock was genuinely felt, and how much was a manufactured media frenzy? Number 7, did Elvis himself know he was blending so much music? It's one thing for music historians and critics to dissect Elvis Presley's sound, identifying the distinct threads of blues, country, and gospel. But did Elvis himself consciously think about these genres when he was singing? Or was it all just instinct? His own statements and observations from those close to him suggest a more organic, less analytical approach. Elvis never described his music in academic terms. He didn't say, I'm going to take 50% blues, 30% country, and 20% gospel and blend them. When asked about his style, he often gave simple, direct answers. He'd say things like, I just sing the way I feel, or I like all kinds of music. This unpretentious attitude was part of his charm. He wasn't trying to invent a new genre, he was just singing what moved him. Peter Guralnick's biographies are filled with anecdotes that show Elvis's natural, unforced approach to music, highlighting his genuine love for diverse sounds rather than a calculated strategy. He genuinely loved all three genres. He grew up surrounded by them. For him, they weren't separate categories in a record store. They were just music. He listened to Arthur Crudup blues, Hank Williams country, and the Blackwood Brothers gospel with equal enthusiasm. His personal record collection, documented by his biographers, reflected this broad taste. He had everything from rhythm and blues to opera, from gospel to country. He didn't build walls between sounds in his own mind. His informal jamming sessions are especially telling. Many accounts, from his early days at Sun to his later years in Graceland, describe Elvis and his band or friends sitting around just playing music for pleasure. And what do they play? Mix of gospel hymns, country ballads, and blues standards. These weren't rehearsals for a show, they were expressions of pure joy and passion for music. In these settings, the lines between genres completely dissolved. He was just singing songs he loved, songs that had shaped him. DJ Fontana, his longtime drummer, often recounted how Elvis would lead these informal sessions, moving seamlessly between genres without a thought. When he recorded That's All Right, he wasn't thinking, I'm going to take a blues song and infuse it with country energy. He was just having fun. He was playing around. Sam Phillips recognized the fusion, but it was Elvis's spontaneous expression that created it. He had absorbed these musical languages so deeply that they became one in his voice. The closest he came to acknowledging the blend was when he talked about his influences. He would speak of how much he admired certain blues singers or country artists or gospel quartets. He freely admitted where he got his inspiration. This honesty further suggests that he didn't see himself as a radical innovator in the academic sense, but rather as someone who was synthesizing the sounds he loved and making them his own. He was a product of his environment, and his environment was a rich tapestry of American musical traditions. His lack of formal musical training was probably a huge advantage here. He didn't learn music through rigid theory or genre classification. He learned it by ear, by feeling, by immersion. This meant he didn't have any rules to break because he never learned them in the first place. He approached music with an open mind and an open heart, allowing the different styles to naturally coalesce within him. This intuitive approach made his fusion authentic, not calculated. It was simply the sound of Elvis. Did Elvis ever feel pressured to lean more heavily into one genre over another by his record labels or managers? If he had been more aware of the groundbreaking nature of his fusion, would it have changed his approach? How much of his musical understanding came from intuition versus deliberate practice and study? And could a musician today achieve such a powerful unconscious blend in a world with far more rigid genre categories? Number 6, how did Scotty, Bill, and DJ help build this new sound? Elvis Presley gets all the credit, and rightly so, for his voice and charisma. But his groundbreaking fusion of blues, country, and gospel wouldn't have been possible without the musicians who played with him. Especially in those formative years, Scotty Moore on guitar, Bill Black on upright bass, and later, DJ Fontana on drums. They weren't just backing musicians, they were crucial collaborators who understood and amplified his unique sound. Scotty Moore was Elvis's first official guitarist. He came from a country and western background, having played in various bands around Memphis. He was a skilled and tasteful player, influenced by country guitarists like Chet Atkins and Merle Travis, but also by blues players. When he joined Elvis, he wasn't playing pure country, he was adapting. His solos were clean, articulate, often sparse, but always driving the song forward. He perfected the rockabilly guitar style, a blend of country picking, blues bends, and a fast rhythmic attack. His licks on That's All Right and Mystery Train are legendary examples of how he blended these elements seamlessly. Music historian James L. Dickerson's Colonel Tom Parker, the man behind the Elvis legend, often details the dynamics within Elvis's early band, emphasizing Moore's pivotal musical role. Bill Black was the bassist. He came from a more rhythm and blues background, having played in various Memphis juke joints. He was a showman himself, known for his enthusiastic slapping of the upright bass. His bass lines were simple but incredibly effective. They provided the rhythmic anchor, a driving pulse that owed as much to blues and R&B as it did to country boogie. He was the thump that made people want to dance. His powerful rhythmic bass lines were crucial for giving Elvis's country-tinged songs a bluesy, driving feel, and his blues-tinged songs a robust, danceable foundation. Together, Moore and Black formed the core of what became known as the Blue Moon Boys with Elvis. Their collaboration was organic. They listened to each other, reacting and building on each other's musical ideas. There were no sheet music or complex arrangements. It was all by ear, by feel. This improvisational approach allowed for the natural blending of genres that defined Elvis's sound. They understood Elvis's unique vocal style and knew how to support it, whether he was leaning into a country lament or a bluesy shout. DJ Fontana joined them a bit later in late 1954, adding drums to the mix. Before Fontana, the rhythm was driven primarily by Black's bass and Moore's guitar. Fontana, with his background in country and R&B bands, brought a steady, driving backbeat that further solidified the rock and roll sound. He wasn't flashy, but he was incredibly solid and rhythmic. He didn't try to overpower the music. Instead, he locked in with Black, creating a powerful, irresistible groove. His simple, effective drumming style became the blueprint for rock and roll drumming. These three musicians weren't just playing notes. They were translating Elvis's intuitive fusion into a cohesive, electrifying sound. They provided the framework that allowed his blues, country, and gospel influences to coalesce into rock and roll. They were pioneers themselves, creating a new musical language on the fly. Their contributions are often highlighted in music documentaries and oral histories of the period, demonstrating how a small group of musicians can collectively innovate. Even after Elvis became a global superstar with RCA, he largely kept this core band together for several years. This speaks volumes about their importance. He trusted their musical instincts. They understood him. Without their collective creativity, the Elvis sound might never have fully emerged, or it would have sounded very different. They were the unsung heroes of the musical revolution, translating his voice into a new genre. Did these sidemen ever feel overshadowed by Elvis's stardom, despite their crucial contributions? How much credit do they truly deserve for the creation of rock and roll compared to Elvis himself? Would Elvis's fusion have taken longer to develop if he hadn't found musicians with such diverse yet complementary backgrounds? And what unknown collaborations or musical experiments did they undertake that never saw the light of day? Number 5, how did the fusion change? After the '68 comeback in Vegas, Elvis Presley's musical journey wasn't static. After his initial explosion, followed by a period dominated by films and soundtracks in the 1960s, his fusion sound evolved. Two major turning points, the 1968 comeback special and his long residency in Las Vegas, showed how his deep roots in blues, country, and gospel continued to shape his music, even as he adapted to new eras and expectations. The 1968 comeback special was a critical moment. It was a return-to-live performance, a reassertion of his musical identity after years of often uninspired movie songs. In this special, Elvis stripped down to the basics, performing in a black leather suit with a small band in a raw, intimate setting. This return to roots heavily emphasized his blues and gospel influences. He sang Trouble with a primal, bluesy growl. He performed a medley of gospel songs that showcased his vocal power and spiritual conviction. And he jammed informally with Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, revisiting old rock and roll hits that were themselves blends of country and blues. Music critics widely hailed the comeback special as a triumph. It reminded everyone that Elvis was first and foremost a powerful, versatile singer, not just a movie star. The raw energy, the blues swagger, the gospel intensity, it was all there, amplified and refined. Music journalist Jerry Hopkins, in his early biography, Elvis: A Biography, described the special as a definitive statement of Elvis's enduring musical power. This period allowed him to reconnect with the core of his sound, proving that the fusion was deeply ingrained. When Elvis launched his Las Vegas residency in 1969, the context changed again. He was performing for a more mature, diverse audience in a glitzy, elaborate setting. His band expanded significantly, incorporating horns, strings, and a large vocal choir. This meant his music became bigger, more orchestral, but even in this grand setting, the fusion persisted. His song choices in Vegas often included bluesy rock songs, country ballads, and powerful gospel numbers. He would open with a bluesy rocker, transition to a heartfelt country song, and then perhaps perform a gospel medley. His cover of Suspicious Minds, a soulful pop song, became a Vegas anthem. He performed songs like Burning Love, Rock and Roll with country leanings, and Always on My Mind, a country pop ballad. He also regularly included gospel standards like How Great Thou Art and American Trilogy in his sets, often to thunderous applause. These moments were powerful reminders of his gospel roots. The expanded arrangements in Vegas sometimes softened the raw edges of his early sound. The blues elements were still there, but perhaps less gritty. The country elements were often more polished, leaning towards country pop. The gospel was grander, more dramatic. But it was still his voice, still his interpretation, carrying the essence of the blend. He was like a chef who had perfected his core recipe, but now had a bigger kitchen and more ingredients to play with. His stage presence also evolved. While still dynamic, the early wild abandon of his rock and roll days gave way to a more controlled, majestic performance style. Yet, the emotional intensity, a hallmark of both blues and gospel, remained. He could still deliver a blues lyric with profound pain or a gospel hymn with overwhelming conviction. His vocals were still powerful, capable of soaring to gospel highs and sinking to bluesy lows. The Vegas era showed that the fusion wasn't just a youthful phase, it was the foundation of his artistry. He could adapt it to different settings, different arrangements, different audiences, and it still held true. It proved that his blend was timeless, capable of evolving while retaining its distinct identity. Did the larger arrangements of the Vegas era ever compromise the authenticity of Elvis's fusion? Could the '68 comeback have truly happened if he hadn't spent years internalizing the film music? How much of the Vegas show was pure artistry, and how much was a performance tailored for a specific audience? And did the world ever fully appreciate the depth of his continued gospel devotion during his most famous secular years? Number 4, how did Elvis's sound change music forever? Elvis Presley's fusion didn't just define his career, it reshaped popular music itself. His ability to blend blues, country, and gospel opened the door for countless artists who followed, and irrevocably altered the landscape of what music could be. He didn't just create rock and roll, he popularized it, making it a global phenomenon. Before Elvis, the music industry was largely segregated. Different genres had their own charts, radio stations, and audiences. White artists mostly played white music, and black artists played black music. Elvis, a white artist performing black music with white instruments and a gospel fervor, shattered these divisions. He made it acceptable, even cool, for young white audiences to listen to music with strong rhythm and blues roots. This cultural bridge was enormous. Scholars exploring the social impact of music, such as Rebe Garofalo and Rockin' the Boat mass media and popular music, often cite Elvis as the crucial figure in breaking down racial barriers in music consumption. His sound, a potent mix of electric guitar, upright bass, and drums later, a full rock band, became the template for rock and roll. The energy, the beat, the raw vocals, these elements, infused with blues, country, and gospel, became the defining characteristics of the new genre. Suddenly, young musicians everywhere wanted to pick up a guitar and play like Scotty Moore, sing like Elvis, and move like him. Think about the artists who came after him. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Led Zeppelin, they all cite Elvis as a primary influence. John Lennon famously said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." This might be an exaggeration, but it captures the immense impact. The British invasion bands in particular were heavily influenced by American rhythm and blues and rock and roll, much of which they discovered through Elvis. They took his fusion, reinterpreted it, and brought it back to America, creating a feedback loop of influence. Elvis proved that popular music didn't have to be bland or predictable. It could be raw, exciting, and emotionally powerful. It could challenge societal norms. His fusion allowed for a greater range of expression than the dominant pop music of the time. It legitimized the use of electric guitar as a lead instrument in popular music, a practice that had strong roots in both country and blues. His legacy isn't just about selling records, though he sold more than 1 billion worldwide. It's about changing the very fabric of popular culture. He showed that music could transcend race, class, and genre. He made the sounds of the South, once considered marginal, into the soundtrack of the world. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted him in its very first class in 1986, recognizing his foundational role in the genre. Even beyond rock and roll, his influence spread. Country artists began incorporating more rock elements, or gospel music, while still distinct, saw some of its expressive styles find their way into broader secular music. His approach to ballads, with their soulful delivery, influenced pop singers for decades. As he created a sonic language that became universal, his death in 1977 solidified his legendary status, but his music continued to resonate. New generations discovered his early rock and roll, his soulful ballads, and his powerful gospel. His records continued to sell, his image continued to inspire. The fusion he created was not just a trend, it was a fundamental shift in how music was made and consumed. It was the sound of a new America, raw, complex, and irresistible. Did Elvis's fusion ultimately homogenize American music, or did it simply create a new, broader category that allowed for more diversity? Could rock and roll have emerged in the same way without a figure like Elvis to popularize this blend? In what ways did his massive success inadvertently overshadow the original black artists from whom he drew so much inspiration? And what undiscovered artists from his era were also performing similar fusions but never received the same attention? Number 3, how do scholars break down this musical DNA? Academic researchers and musicologists have spent decades dissecting Elvis Presley's music, trying to understand the precise nature of his blues, country, and gospel fusion. They go beyond casual listening, using detailed analysis to pinpoint specific elements and trace their origins. Their work often confirms what many listeners intuitively felt: Elvis's music is a complex tapestry woven from these distinct threads. One common approach is ethnomusicology. Scholars in this field examine music within its cultural context. They look at Elvis's upbringing in Tupelo and Memphis, studying the specific radio stations he listened to, the churches he attended, and the juke joints he might have visited. They analyze how the sounds of the Black Delta Blues white country music, including hillbilly boogie and bluegrass, and white Southern gospel quartets, permeated his environment. For example, research might focus on the prevalence of specific blues scales or vocal improvisation techniques common in the South, and how these appear in Elvis's singing. Publications like the Journal of American Folklore or Popular Music and Society have, over the years, published studies on the regional cultural forces that shaped early rock and roll, often citing Elvis as a prime example. Another method involves musical analysis. This is where scholars get very specific about the notes, rhythms, and structures. They compare Elvis's versions of songs to their originals. For instance, comparing Arthur Crudup's "That's All Right" with Elvis's cover reveals how Elvis sped up the tempo, altered the rhythmic emphasis, and introduced a different vocal timbre. They might analyze Scotty Moore's guitar solos to identify specific blues bends, country licks, or the rhythmic phrasing that became characteristic of rockabilly. They might look at Bill Black's bass lines to see how they blended country walking bass patterns with rhythm and blues drive. This technical analysis shows how the genres were mixed, not just that they were mixed. Music theorists studying rock and roll evolution frequently publish detailed score analyses that highlight these hybridizations. Vocal analysis is particularly important for Elvis. Researchers study his vocal range, his use of falsetto, his growls, his croons, and his rhythmic phrasing. They trace how his melismatic singing multiple notes on one syllable reflects both gospel ornamentation and blues expressiveness. They might even use spectrographic analysis to examine the acoustic properties of his voice, comparing it to known blues, country, and gospel singers to identify shared characteristics. Studies from linguistic phonetics can sometimes shed light on his particular vocal inflections, showing how they blend different regional and musical accents. Historical scholarship provides context. Biographers like Peter Guralnick, Last Train to Memphis, Careless Love, and Ernst Jorgensen, Elvis Presley, A Life in Music, meticulously document Elvis's life, influences, and recording sessions. They gather interviews, studio logs, and contemporary reviews to build a comprehensive picture of how his sound developed. This historical lens helps confirm when and with whom certain musical choices were made, and how these choices reflect the blending of genres. For example, Jorgensen's work is invaluable for understanding the specific dynamics in the Sun studio sessions. Furthermore, scholars often engage in cultural studies to understand the social impact of this fusion. They examine how Elvis's music challenged racial segregation, transformed youth culture, and sparked moral panic. They look at how his performances were perceived by different demographic groups and how his image became a site of cultural struggle. These studies help explain why his fusion was so revolutionary and controversial. Texts examining the cultural reception of rock and roll such as those by Simon Frith, often dedicate significant sections to Elvis's groundbreaking genre-bending appeal. In essence, academic study transforms the intuitive understanding of Elvis's fusion into concrete, verifiable data. It allows us to see not just the what, but also the how and why behind his unprecedented musical synthesis, solidifying his place as a pivotal figure in music history. Are there specific micro-elements of his vocal technique that still defy categorization into these three main genres? How much of the academic focus on fusion retrospectively imposes structure onto what was purely intuitive? What role did regional accents and dialects play in shaping the perceived sound of these genres for academic analysis? And are there any obscure recordings or unreleased sessions that might reveal an even deeper, more complex blend of influences than we currently understand? Number 2, was Elvis more than just a musician? Elvis Presley's impact went far beyond just the notes and rhythms of his music. His fusion of blues, country, and gospel wasn't just a sonic experiment, it was a cultural force that touched fashion, dance, identity, and even challenged the very social fabric of America. He was a phenomenon, a symbol, and a catalyst for change. Think about fashion. Before Elvis, popular music stars often dressed in suits or demure dresses. Elvis wore bold, vibrant clothes. His early look, with the slicked-back pompadour, the sideburns, the open-collared shirts, and later, his gold-laced suit and jumpsuits became iconic. This wasn't just about looking good, it was about embodying a new kind of masculinity, one that was both rebellious and sensual. His style was an extension of his music's fusion, a bit country, a bit bluesy swagger, and an undeniable showmanship that had roots in theatrical gospel performances. This look was copied by millions of teenagers, making him a style icon who influenced youth fashion for decades. Scholars in fashion history often trace his influence on mid-20th century popular aesthetics, highlighting his role in defining rebel chic. Then there's dance and movement. Before Elvis, stage performances were often static. When Elvis moved, he gyrated his hips, he shook his leg, he dropped to his knees. These movements, often described as lewd or vulgar by adults, were exhilarating for teenagers. They were physical manifestations of the music's rhythm and emotion. His movements were rooted in the uninhibited expression of gospel worship and the sensual physicality of rhythm and blues performers. He didn't just sing the music, he danced the music. This wasn't choreographed in a traditional sense. It was an instinctive response to the fusion of sounds within him. His body language became as famous and as controversial as his voice, profoundly influencing popular dance styles and the very concept of stage presence in popular music. Cultural studies on body politics and performance theory frequently analyze his impact on the expressive freedom of artists. Elvis also helped shape youth identity. In the post-war era, teenagers were emerging as a distinct demographic with their own culture and purchasing power. Elvis's music and image gave them a voice, a rallying point. His fusion spoke to their diverse tastes. They liked country, they liked blues, they liked pop. He united them under the banner of rock and roll, a genre that felt uniquely theirs. He embodied rebellion, freedom, and youthful exuberance. For a generation caught between the traditions of their parents and the promise of a new future, Elvis offered an identity that felt authentic and exciting. Books on the history of youth culture consistently feature Elvis as a central figure in the emergence of the teenager as a powerful cultural force. Finally, his impact on racial dynamics cannot be overstated. While not a civil rights activist, Elvis inadvertently became a symbol of racial desegregation in music. By popularizing black musical forms among white audiences, he forced a cultural reckoning. His music challenged the idea that certain sounds belonged exclusively to certain races. This was a hugely significant, though often uncomfortable, aspect of his legacy. His fusion blurred racial lines in a way that had profound social implications, even if it led to accusations of appropriation. His music was a soundtrack to an America grappling with its own deep-seated prejudices. This Elvis was more than a musician. He was a cultural icon whose fusion of sounds sparked a revolution that transcended music. He redefined what a popular artist could be, how they could look, move, and inspire. He wasn't just playing songs, he was reshaping the very idea of American identity. Did Elvis ever fully grasp the depth of his cultural impact beyond simply making popular records? How much of his fashion and dance was an authentic expression of his musical fusion, and how much was a calculated performance? In what specific ways did his white identity make his fusion palatable to audiences who might have otherwise rejected the same music from black artists? And how would youth culture have developed in the 1950s if Elvis had never emerged to provide this unifying genre-bending force? Number one, what enduring mysteries still surround Elvis's unique blend? Even after decades of study, countless books, and exhaustive analysis, some profound questions about Elvis Presley's fusion of blues, country, and gospel remain. We understand what he did and largely how he did it, but the enduring mysteries lie in the deeper why and the subtle nuances that continue to elude definitive answers. One core mystery is the extent of his conscious intention. We know he loved all three genres. We know he absorbed them naturally, but did he ever even fleetingly understand the revolutionary cultural bridge he was building? Was there a moment of deliberate synthesis, or was it purely instinctive? Many biographers lean towards instinct, citing his simple declarations of just singing what I like. But is it possible that a young man so attuned to music and so driven might have at some level recognized the power of combining these distinct sounds, even if he didn't articulate it academically? The full extent of his self-awareness in crafting this fusion remains elusive. Another question revolves around the precise blend ratios. While we can identify blues scales or country licks, the exact proportion and interplay of these elements within any given song often feels organic and unquantifiable. How much of the gospel feel in a secular song is structural, and how much is simply the spiritual resonance of his unique vocal timbre? Can we truly isolate these elements without losing the magic of the whole? It's like trying to separate the ingredients in a perfectly blended stew. Once it's cooked, the individual flavors are there, but they've become something new together. So music theory can get us close, but the ineffable quality of his sound often resists complete dissection. Then there's the cultural appropriation debate. While Elvis opened doors for black music to reach white audiences, the discussion continues about the ethics of a white artist achieving massive fame and wealth by reinterpreting genres created and perfected by black artists, who often remain marginalized. Did Elvis fully understand the social and economic context of the blues and R&B he drew from? Was his respect genuine and sufficient? Or was his role, however unintentional, part of a larger historical pattern of white artists profiting from black cultural forms? This isn't just a historical question, it's a moral and ethical one that continues to spark debate, especially in contemporary discussions about cultural ownership. What about the road not taken? What if Elvis had pursued a purely gospel career or stayed firmly within country music? Would he have achieved similar success? Would the world have eventually found rock and roll through another artist, or would it have developed differently? His particular trajectory, the specific timing, and his individual charisma seem so perfectly aligned with the rise of rock and roll that it's hard to imagine an alternate history. But thinking about these counterfactuals reminds us of the fragility and contingency of historical events and how much hinged on one young man's specific choices and opportunities. Finally, there's the enduring resonance of his presence. His music still moves people, even those who weren't alive when he first burst onto the scene. What is it about this particular fusion that gives it such timeless appeal? Is it the raw emotion, the familiar yet electrifying melodies, the sheer power of his voice? The mystery of charisma, combined with the power of his musical blend, continues to captivate. Oh, he tapped into something fundamental about the human experience, and his unique sonic synthesis was the vessel. These aren't questions with easy answers. They highlight that even the most thoroughly documented cultural phenomena retain elements of enigma. Elvis Presley's fusion was a remarkable alchemy, a perfect storm of talent, timing, and tradition. And like any great mystery, it continues to invite contemplation, proving that true artistry often leaves us with more to ponder than we can ever fully explain. How much more could we learn if we had access to every casual jam session and every private conversation Elvis had about music? Could new forms of AI analysis reveal patterns in his fusion that human ears have missed? Will the cultural appropriation debate ever reach a consensus regarding his specific role? And what future musical fusions, perhaps not yet imagined, will draw inspiration from Elvis's genre-bending legacy in ways we cannot predict?